Okay, going straight into it, in the last video we talked about the origin of the aphalas vampires, and now we will be going on to the story of Aerios Seablade and Mayernier Sea Hunter. In the last area, or on the stream just a couple of minutes ago, we discussed how the origin of the vampires started to play into Nagrasak and Rornay Stormcurst. But there is another group who play quite heavily into Rornay's actions, as they are not necessarily the group most affected by him, but they are the ones who spend the most time actually hunting him. And that's the Sea Elves, aka his own kin. The Sea Elves actually commit 2 dedicated hunters to initial efforts, and these are, if I bring up the images, okay, let's browse. Aerios Seablade and Mayernier the Sea Hunter. 2 of their greatest essential warriors, per se, and sailors, but they attempt to start hunting Rornay for a while. However, things don't exactly go to plan. They don't end up finding him, but they do help handle a lot of issues with other groups like the Sapphire Pirates and others. But Aerios himself actually starts to become disillusioned with how the Sea Elves, or of the 4 colonies, are actually governing, and how they're handling measures, and not wanting to idly sit by and be a reactionary presence, especially being in close proximity to the likes of the Nacerez with the first demons. So he ends up actually leaving, and quite a few followers go with him, and they end up forming up in the now empty northwest of Onarkivris, and for quite some time out there they continue to fight, they stand by with all of these measures, and they prove an effective force. They consistently sail over and pretty much become a thorn in Nagrasak's side, preventing him from doing anything in the accursed shoreline or even Daranak, which heavily obviously helps the forest dwarves because of the proximity, and even the Ajati to an extent. But it becomes a greater problem when Rornay properly reveals himself onto the world after recovering from the actions against the Last Prince, where there's noted of Dark Elf forces consistently starting to move over to Arisen, and small pockets. And just a little trivia note, one of these pockets are actually the ones who become the first Ice Elves. They get caught in a combat and it doesn't go their way. That's the real baseline way of putting that. But the Aerios' forces end up quite limited in what they can do, and the Sea Elves themselves are reluctant to try and do anything against the Dark Elves until Rornay becomes a more thrashing presence, and eventually they do task Mayernier with starting to hunt him down again becoming quickly concerned about all of his actions on Arisen and how his reach seems to be hitting others, such as Zakenvor and other forces around, and even hearing tale of raids on the actual Arachniloth archipelago. So Mayernier's first task is actually to recover Aerios, where together they can work on hunting down Rornay at the head of the fleet. And after some lengthy debate, this does actually happen. Aerios is rescued, or not rescued, he returns, though he does not actually commit any of his own mercenaries to this action, as he sees this primarily as a simple Sea Elf issue that he's helping out with, of Steagris, so none of his followers. But their pursuit ultimately doesn't actually lead to anything per se. It's not until Rornay plunges forward into the open vastness of this area of the sea, the almost intersecting point of Onokivris and Arisen, and the archipelago technically, where Rornay conjures up great storms, and the Sea Elves start to realise that they should have actually intervened faster than they did, as this was beyond the reach of any of the other sort of prominent ally or protector race naval powers, which are largely focused around the Twin Isles and Destinal. Aerios and Rornay heavily attempt to hunt down... No, Aerios and Rornay. Aerios and Mayernier heavily attempt to hunt down Rornay. And in the mess of these vortexes and storms that actually start to occur, they find him. Completely unaware of what it was he was actually planning, per se. They are quickly informed, though. And they end up engaging Rornay. But, big but here, despite being able to take out a lot of his forces and even challenge both of his chief lieutenants, Malkyish, reference to the old series I was doing, and Narazil, the Harbinger, and they duel both of these demonic creatures, and they are able to best both of them, though it's currently unknown whether they actually slay them or not. But when it comes to actually dueling Rornay, and I am very sorry to say this, but they just get torn apart. At the end of it, you've got two talented warriors against a Kunrook who's doubled up with a magic that allows him to manipulate nature on a boat. They just get tossed around and thrashed about, which doesn't exactly go very well for them. And as a final note to their part, because I'm going to culminate all of this in another video, because there's another key one that needs to be focused on here, and that is the Indigo Foxes, or another one, was actually the presence that ended up leading Mayernier to uncover where Aerios actually was. So whilst their actions here are even more limited, they're still making a commitment. But what I will say is that after this battle and everything, the two of them do move on. Aerios returns to his... He attempts to return to his group, but he actually finds out that in his absence, his mercenaries had not been completely wiped out, but had been heavily weakened by a rogue attack, with a warning coming that Nagrasak's forces were actually marching on Steagris. This being Nagrasak's forces who had purposely crossed the Ruby Mist to do this, somehow. And Aerios has to rush back, and he and Mayernier do a final stand with the other Sea Elves to fight. They do end up winning and staving off the threat, but it actually ends with Mayernier being slain. But as for Aerios, that is all the law that's on him for the time being. So, but that battle in the storms is the key element. This was just a follow-up to address what happened after. So, with that, we will start to mosey on to the next, and I'm actually probably going to keep this next one on this recording because that was actually a fairly short recording on that bit. But the next one to address is Morgana, and this is one that I know I have mentioned quite a few times. And we will start off by attempting to find her image, which I know is somewhere. There we are, Morgana, a Catapultier human. Morgana is an interesting character for a lot of reasons. She has a bloodline that has no particular magic to it or anything, but something happened with one of her ancestors, her grandfather in fact, and it is something of a fairly suspicious kind of nature on where it came across, but it was a prophecy that showcased their bloodline to be the key instrument in uniting all of the different human forces all across Aphalas. So the kingdoms on the 4 kingdoms on Destinal, the humans of Onarkrith, those of the steppe tribes who were present but few, and then the mountain holds. And this initial effort was the idea to form up all of the human forces together to form one great protective force that could safeguard against Nagrasak, Sinevia, or any other force. But the issue was it drove her grandfather mad, and seriously mad. But there is one actual key tie-in that does need to be addressed, and that is her own bloodline is actually quite rare, where she is half Catapultian. She's half of Catapultier. I haven't decided which actual human bloodline she's tracing from, because it could be Felden or another. But she is also half Fayoun. And she believes that this gives her the potential right and everything, and she gathers up those who are tied to this oath by essential blood, their ancestors or some form of their relative had sworn to it, and she attempts to gather them to follow up, and she gets aided by some other notable creatures. Like there's 2 half rhino brothers who join her. There's a set of goblins that join her as well, and her whole task ends up being essentially actually set upon by Becca Quinn. And yes, most notably, in comparison to the Indigo Foxes, Becca Quinn's actions in all of this have been notably more slim. But then again, when you're comparing these fox-like creatures whose origin is totally unknown to a Talamarith human who is bound by the same laws of time and age as any other human. It makes sense why this scale was a bit uneven, but Becca Quinn paints up this knowledge and the future with Morgana wanting to actually locate this book so far, this book that had this prophecy, the book that her character has in her hand. And Becca Quinn paints the effective name of who does it, and during this action it is noted that several years before this, about a decade before, the Library of the Crescent Moon on Kalarath, Kafaltir, and eventually Lethos is, in which they do rebuild, I believe, but arguably their greatest source of knowledge and one of the greatest sources of knowledge in the entire world. And upon raiding it, which is something that I forgot to mention in the vampire video, because the Last Prince does actually do that, the library gets burnt. And that's one of the things that makes it a bit more controversial with them. But Morgana's force does gather up, and they end up travelling to and encountering the Last Prince. And they attempt to do a deal for the book. It doesn't exactly go fully to plan, but they exchange glances, they talk about these prophecies, the different notions that they had heard from these various groups, and they do actually stay for a while. And what actually ends up happening is Morgana's group do end up getting caught and aiding in the defense of one of the cities against yet another attack from Nagrasak's forces. They do end up becoming victorious on that, and Morgana forms a bit of a connection with the Last Prince, but eventually does move on with her group, and they end up travelling towards Arisen in the effort on actually gathering the Faerun to their side first of all. Initially I had it that they went to Ancestornir first, but that kind of seemed a bit off, so just to go to a stray island and see if they can gather the people to help them. And what happens to Morgana and her group is, to be frank, actually fairly unknown. They do end up forming connections with the Faerun. They do end up actually gathering other groups to them as well, like some rogue forces of Destinal as well. But effectively what happens is they disappear into Onokrith, and there's rumours that they get found elsewhere as well. There's a few different rumours. One of them that they had a stand in the Alanay Savannah, another that they ended up on the Ice Sea of Arisen. But the group sort of, this host and this army do kind of end up sort of disappearing, although her whole efforts and everything did raise some alarm bells within the Protector races of, are the humans about to do something pretty stupid? Is the best answer. In their eyes, is this going to be a vain attempt at trying to do something that cannot be accomplished necessarily with just the sheer size and the distance and everything? But it's actually Morgana's connection with the Last Prince that ends up being one of the big notes, because he had heard tale of, well, he had faced Rawne in battle figuring that he had slain him. But then in one of their conversations, Morgana brings up that Becca-Quinn pointed of a battle in the storms, of the waves and everything, and titans thrashing about, and these illustrations which make the Lost Prince start to second guess whether he had actually dealt a proper death blow to Rorne or not. And Morgana's own quest is a bit of a weird tie-in to all of this. It does tie in, but it has like just efforts, and it more kind of sets up with what happens. And there's several characters there that are going to probably get more lore about them, so whether stuff follows on or not is a bit up in the air at the moment. But now we shall move on to the next one, which is actually the culmination of all of this. So please do check out the links in the description. Part of the show are coming soon. Other stuff is available on the Ko-fi page. Liberation of Destino and Assault on Aphalas Book 1 and 2 are available. This is not that story, just clarifying. But yeah, please do check them out. The other books are out there as well. Want to support the channel? The Ko-fi page is clear. Yes, Pebble, it is true that Maggoty has a nose. And yeah, please do comment, like, and subscribe, share with your friends, and all the rest of it. Welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Felomine books.